Okay. Good morning, everyone. So yesterday we discussed some basic facts about orthogonal matrices. I introduced positive definite matrix, and I stated a result of Cartan which says that any orthogonal matrix is a product of householder matrices. If it is n by n, then you need at most n householder matrices to realize this orthogonal matrix as a product of these householder matrices. So that says that any orthogonal linear transformation which is induced by an orthogonal matrix is a composition of at most n reflections. Yeah, so that is the geometric interpretation of an orthogonal matrix, that it is composed of reflections in hyperplanes. Okay. Yeah. And positive definite matrix is a symmetric matrix, and we proved that all its eigenvalues are positive, and therefore a positive definite matrix is non-singular. Yeah. Only invertible matrices can be positive definite. But much more is true. Yeah, so I want to do a characterization of positive definite matrices in terms of what are called principal minors. Yeah. So principal minors are determinants of principal submatrices. Okay. What is a principal submatrix? You take an n by n matrix and remove certain columns and corresponding rows also. Suppose you remove first and third column, you remove first and third rows also of that matrix. Then you get a smaller matrix and square matrix, and take the determinant, that is called the principal minor of size n minus 2 by n minus 2. So 1 by 1 principal minors are the entries on the diagonal of the matrix. Yeah. Then 2 by 2 principal minors, you take a 2 by 2 submatrix whose principal diagonal coincides with the principal diagonal of the main matrix. Yeah. Then take its determinant. So we get 2 by 2 principal minors. Similarly, you get 3 by 3 principal minors, and n by n principal minors is just the determinant of the matrix. Okay. Yeah. So there is a interpretation of characteristic polynomial of a matrix, yeah, in terms of principal minors. Do you know that? Yeah, the coefficients of the characteristic polynomial can be written in terms of principal minors. Okay. So suppose I have a n by n matrix, then the characteristic polynomial, yeah, it can be written as lambda to the power n minus some coefficient times lambda to the power n minus 1 and so on. And last coefficient up to the sign is determinant of the matrix. And coefficient of negative lambda to the power n minus 1 is what? It is the trace of the matrix. But the trace of the matrix is sum of 1 by 1 principal minors. Okay. Similarly, you look at coefficient of lambda to the power n minus 2. That coefficient will come from adding up the 2 by 2 principal minors. Add up all the 2 by 2 principal minors of the matrix, that will be the coefficient of lambda to the power n minus 2, and so on. Then coefficient of lambda to the power n minus 3 will involve the sum of all principal 3 by 3 minors and so on. Okay, so that is a good exercise for you to try. It is just a small exercise in determinant. Okay, so let me write the result. Yeah. So this is characteristic polynomial. So suppose A is an n by n matrix. So let us, for simplicity, let us focus on real matrices. That's what I am doing. Many things can be said about complex matrices, but let me not go into that. You take a real n by n matrix and lambda be an indeterminate. Then consider determinant of A plus lambda times. Normally we write lambda I minus A and then we have to worry about these signs. But this is also serves as a good substitute for characteristic polynomial. Here there are no sign problems. Lambda to the power n s1 lambda to the power n minus 1 plus Sn. Okay. Then this is the result, that Si is the sum of all I by I principal minors of A. Is that clear? Yeah, this is a good exercise in computing determinants. You can, I'll give you a hint. Take any column of A minus lambda I and expand using cofactors. And okay, so try to prove this yourself. You already know that this Sn up to sign is determinant, and S1 is negative of the trace of the matrix. Okay, and look at that proof, and you will be able to construct a proof of this yourself. Okay. Yeah. So using this, we can give a very effective characterization of positive semi-definite matrix. Positive, definite, symmetric. Symmetric is part of the definition. I want to just emphasize positive definite matrices. So let A be an n by n symmetric real matrix, then A is positive definite. Remember the definition of positive definite? Positive definite means X transpose AX is positive for all X non-zero. Yeah, that is positive definite. And positive sub-indefinite is that for which this is bigger or equal to 0. It could be 0. Yeah. And it straight away implies that a positive definite matrix has to be a non-singular matrix. Yeah. If it was singular, you can find an X which is not 0 so that AX is 0. Right? Singular matrix has this property that a non-zero vector is mapped to 0 vector by action of A. So if AX is 0, this is also 0. Right? So, but positive definite matrix has to have this property, and therefore AX cannot be 0 for non-zero X, and that shows that A is a non-singular matrix. Okay. Then A is positive definite if and only if all SIs are non-zero. Positive definite. Right. So I suggest that say if you assume SI is positive and lambda is positive, this will be always positive. Lambda is positive, SI is positive, this is always positive. Okay. And then you write down the interpretation of characteristic polynomial. The roots of characteristic polynomial, they are the eigenvalues. So you can factorize characteristic polynomial as lambda minus lambda 1, lambda minus lambda 2, etc., etc. Use that interpretation and positivity of SIs. You can easily prove this fact. Okay. So I'll give a reference. It is proved in my notes, but a nice book to read is by Professor R.B. Bapat. Is linear algebra and linear models. Okay, now let us start our main topic. This is SVD of real rectangular matrices. So statement is valid for any real matrix. We can take also complex matrix, but I will not go into this. So suppose A is a real m by n matrix, then there exist orthogonal matrices. U, which is a m by m matrix, and V, which is a n by n matrix. Both are orthogonal, and a rectangular matrix of size m by n, which looks like sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma r 0, 0. Okay. So we can talk about diagonal matrix among rectangular matrices also. So non-zero entries are on the diagonal entries. Diagonal entries are II entries, even in a non-square matrix. Okay, where R is the rank of A, and A is factorized as U times sigma times transpose of V. Okay, so it factorizes a matrix in terms of good matrices. Orthogonal matrices are very good matrices because they have these nice geometric properties. If you map two vectors, if you map a vector by an orthogonal matrix, the length of the vector will be preserved. Yeah. If you take a linear transformation induced by an orthogonal matrix, then that linear transformation preserves dot product of vectors. It preserves, and it preserves length of vectors, and therefore it will preserve angle between vectors. So entire geometry is preserved when you apply a linear transformation induced by an orthogonal matrix. Yeah? And we know the structure of orthogonal matrices. They are composed of reflections, right? And the linear transformation induced by this matrix is very simple. What does it do? It maps basis vectors to scalar multiples, non-zero scalar multiples of the same vectors. Yeah. So this is just stretching the principal directions by the amount sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma r, and this is another orthogonal matrix. Transpose of an orthogonal matrix is an orthogonal matrix. So when you write down linear transformation induced by A, which means any linear transformation, yeah, any linear transformation from Rn to Rm, it says it's a composition of an orthogonal transformation and a diagonal transformation followed by another orthogonal transformation. And therefore, any linear transformation is composed of reflections and stretching along the principal directions. So this is a very nice geometric interpretation of any linear transformation from Rn to Rm. Okay, this is heavily used in mechanics where they need to worry about stresses. Okay. Yeah. So this is the SVD. We want to prove that SVD exists for any real matrices, and it will have numerous applications. Let me first point out two applications before I do the proof. Okay. So two quick applications. So first one is called the polar decomposition of a matrix. Yeah. So corollary. So let A be a square matrix with real entries. Then A can be written as W times P, where W is an orthogonal matrix and P is a positive semi-definite matrix. So any such matrix can be written like this. So we just use this factorization. Proof is one line. A equal to U sigma V transpose. Okay, and we can insert V transpose V into this. So V transpose V sigma V transpose. Okay, V is orthogonal matrix, so V transpose V is identity matrix. So I can insert V transpose V here and regroup like this. These two are orthogonal matrices and therefore their product is an orthogonal matrix. This is orthogonal times this diagonal matrix times its inverse. Okay, so this matrix is similar to sigma. Is that correct? This matrix, because V transpose is V inverse. So this matrix is similar to this diagonal matrix sigma. But the entries on the diagonal matrix, they are non-negative. The entries on the principal diagonal are non-negative. So what are the eigenvalues of this matrix? If this sigma was square matrix, eigenvalues will be simply the diagonal entries. Yeah. So therefore, so this is what? This is n by n. Okay, and V transpose. This is m by n. Okay, our A is n by n. Okay, so this is n by n. This is n by n. So this matrix is similar to sigma, and so the eigenvalues of this matrix are sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma r, and the other entries are other eigenvalues are all 0. So since eigenvalues are non-negative, this is a positive semi-definite matrix. Yeah, that's a characterization of positive definite matrices are those where all eigenvalues are positive, and positive semi-definite matrices are those where all eigenvalues are non-negative. Yeah, this eigenvalues of this matrix are all non-negative because they are sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma r, 0, 0, 0. So we have factorized any square real matrix as a product of orthogonal matrix and a positive semi-definite matrix. So this is called polar decomposition. This is similar to writing a complex number in terms of polar coordinates. So it will be mod z times e to the power I theta. Any complex number can be written like this. Yeah, this is non-negative and its absolute value is 1. Okay, so this is replaced by an orthogonal matrix, and this is the analog of this matrix. Okay, this occurs in linear algebra. You take some result about complex numbers, and complex numbers are 1 by 1 matrices. You ask for analog for complex matrices, which are square matrices, and very often there is a very interesting result about complex square matrices, which is analogous to a result about complex numbers. Okay, so this is called polar decomposition. Let me do one more quick application, and that is for data compression. So in our tutorial yesterday we discussed this corollary. This is data compression. Yeah. So suppose A is a square matrix. And A can be written as U sigma V transpose. So this is U and this is a square matrix. So the entries are these, where R is the rank of A and sigma i's are singular values. And V transpose. Now we display U. I write in terms of column vectors, and this is my sigma 1, etc. and write V transpose in terms of columns, okay, or rows. So rows of V transpose, they are column vectors of V. Okay, so V1, V2, Vn. Is that fine? Yeah, I'm just using the singular value decomposition for a square real matrix. Okay. R is the rank. R is the rank of A. We'll see that there are only that many non-zero singular values. We'll see that later. This, if you multiply, so when you multiply matrices, we usually look at row of a matrix on the left and column vector of a matrix on the right. But you can also multiply by using the column vectors. Okay. So if you do that, this can be written as sigma 1 U1 V1 transpose plus sigma 2 U2 V2 transpose plus sigma R UR VR transpose. U1 is a column vector and this is a row vector. So this is a n by n matrix. Yeah, this is an n by n matrix. So I have written an n by n matrix in terms of sum of n by n matrices. Okay, and these are the multipliers. The singular values are the multipliers. All right. Now you see, if I have a matrix A which is 1000 by 1000, it has 1 million entries in it. Okay, it has 1 million entries in this. This is a column vector. It has n entries. Sigma 1 times first component of U1, sigma 1 times second component of U, etc. So this has 1000 entries and V1 transpose also has 1000 entries. So this is involving 2000 entries. Okay, another set of 2000 entries, and this R is the rank of the matrix. And in practice, what happens is a few singular values are enough to approximate the matrix for practical purposes. We don't need to take all the singular values. Okay, they rapidly go down. We display sigma 1 to be the largest singular values, followed by smaller singular value and so on. Okay, so sigma 1 is bigger than or equal to sigma 2, bigger than or equal to sigma 3, etc. So if we display like this, then there are only a few dominant singular values. The rest are not going to contribute to the data much for practical purposes. Okay, so we will take 2000 here, 2000 here, and suppose we take 20 such entries in this representation. Then we will be taking 20 times 2000, and that is 40,000. Yeah, so we can approximate a matrix which has 1 million entries in terms of 40,000 entries. 40,000 real numbers are enough to reconstruct the matrix for practical purposes. And what is the proportionality for data compression? 25, right? So we have reduced the data size by 25 times, and that's a major reduction. Yeah. So if this is employed in sending an image, so if A represents a 1000 by 1000 matrix where each entry is corresponding to 1 pixel, yeah, of a picture, and that pixel is a number which represents the color of that pixel from white to black. Yeah. So these 1 million numbers tell us everything about the image. You can reconstruct the image using these 1 million numbers. But this is saying that you can reconstruct using 40,000 numbers. Okay, and that you saw yesterday in the illustration, that only 5 singular values were taken and the picture was as good as you can see. Okay, so this is a major application in image processing of singular value decomposition, and this is made possible because we have factorized our matrix in a nice way. Okay, and there will be a public talk tomorrow, which will talk about other matrix factorizations. There are many matrix factorizations. This is one of them. Okay. Yeah. So let me now proceed to the proof. Yeah. Okay, so let us try to prove this. So the proof makes use of what is called the spectral theorem. So let A be an n by n real matrix, real symmetric matrix. Then then A has n real eigenvalues, say lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda n, and an orthonormal basis of eigenvectors. Say V1, V2, Vn, and they are corresponding to lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda n. So I have a real symmetric matrix, then there is a basis of Rn consisting of eigenvectors of the matrix, and the eigenvectors corresponding to distinct eigenvalues are perpendicular anyway. Okay, for this is a general fact. But if you have real symmetric matrix, then you can find a orthonormal basis of eigenvectors of the matrix. Yeah, the eigenvalues could be repeated, could be distinct, no condition. Yeah, and because it's a basis, I can construct a matrix corresponding to these eigenvectors V1, V2, Vn, and multiply on the left. Okay. If you multiply on the left, what happens? I can multiply column wise. So this will be equal to AV1, AV2, AVn. Okay. Multiply the symmetric matrix on the right by the n by n matrix where the column vectors are eigenvectors. Then AV1, I get these column vectors. What is AV1? Lambda 1 V1, lambda 2 V2. So this is equal to the diagonal matrix lambda 1, lambda n times V1, Vn. Okay, this is same as saying, suppose I call this matrix by S, then it is same as saying S inverse AS is equal to the diagonal matrix lambda 1, lambda n. This is similar to A because S is a non-singular matrix. The column vectors of S are linearly independent because they form an orthonormal basis of Rn. So this S is a non-singular matrix, and therefore this is similar to A, and this spectral theorem for real symmetric matrix says that your given real symmetric matrix is similar to a diagonal matrix. Yeah. So we'll make use of this fact, and I hope you have read the proof of this result. Yeah. Okay. So let us use this. Okay. So we are trying to factorize A in this way, U sigma V transpose. Okay, we want to achieve this factorization. A is arbitrary real matrix, rectangular. Okay, it's rectangular. But now you look at these two matrices, A transpose A and AA transpose. This is M by N, so this is N by M, and this product is N by N matrix. Similarly, this product is M by M matrix. Yeah. So A was not symmetric. A was arbitrary matrix. But by looking at these two matrices, I have two real symmetric matrices, M by M size and N by N size. I can apply spectral theorem on both these matrices. Is that clear? AA transpose and A transpose A, they are real symmetric matrices, and therefore they will have spectral decomposition using the spectral theorem. And so each one of these matrices will have a orthogonal matrix consisting of eigenvectors of this matrix and another orthogonal matrix whose column vectors are eigenvectors of this matrix. Yeah. So the eigenvectors of this matrix will go into column vectors of U, and eigenvectors of this matrix will go into column vectors of V. Okay, we have to understand what this sigma is. Okay, so if look at this, and this is a small exercise for you to prove that rank of A, suppose this is R, this is also equal to rank of AA transpose, and this is also equal to rank of A transpose A. They have same rank. Yeah. And if you take a symmetric, real symmetric matrix, can you indicate the rank of the matrix by looking at eigenvalues? Rank of a matrix can be characterized in terms of eigenvalues. What is the characterization? Number of non-zero eigenvalues is the rank of the matrix. So rank of A is R, rank of A transpose is also R, rank of A transpose A is also R. Yeah. So these two matrices, A transpose and A transpose A, they have different sizes, but the number of non-zero eigenvalues will be same for A transpose and A transpose A. Yeah. So these two matrices, AA transpose and A transpose A, have same number of non-zero eigenvalues. So suppose I take a eigenvalue of AA transpose. Suppose AA transpose times V equal to lambda V, where V is a non-zero vector and lambda, because it is symmetric, real symmetric matrix, this lambda will be a real number. Okay. Yeah. So I multiply this equation on both the sides by V transpose. So this is lambda times V transpose V. Do you recognize this? Yeah, what is this? One, because this is, I can take eigenvector to be of unit length. Okay, let V be of unit length. Then this side is 1, so I get lambda. And what is this left hand side? This is what? This is transpose of this vector. This is a vector. A transpose V is a vector, and this is its transpose, and therefore it is the square of length of A transpose V. So this is lambda V transpose V. So what does it say about lambda? Non-negative, right? So eigenvalues are non-negative of A transpose A and A transpose by the same argument, right? So these two matrices have non-negative eigenvalues, and number of non-zero eigenvalues is the rank of the original matrix. Okay? Yeah. So we take the non-zero eigenvalues of these two matrices which are same, right? And then take the square roots, because they are non-negative numbers anyway. I can take their square roots. Okay. These are called the singular values, and they will go into this matrix. Is that clear? A transpose and A transpose A, they are real symmetric matrices, and they are positive semi-definite. This argument shows they are positive semi-definite matrices. So eigenvalues are non-negative. You take their square roots, and they are the sigma i's. They are the singular values. Okay. So let us. So when you try to prove a result, we have to somehow guess. What is it that we need to prove? Okay. So let us start the proof. I will use spectral theorem on both these matrices. Get orthonormal basis of Rn and Rm. Okay. So take A transpose A, and this will give me an n by n orthogonal matrix. We write it in terms of column vectors, and A transpose A Vi equal to lambda I Vi, and these lambda i's are non-zero. I mean, they are non-negative. This is real symmetric matrix, so I can get this square matrix whose column vectors are eigenvectors of this, and they constitute an orthonormal basis. This is orthonormal basis of Rn. Yeah, we can do that. Okay. So that means A transpose A Vi equal to lambda I Vi for all I. And rearrange matters so that assume that lambda 1 is bigger than equal to lambda 2 bigger than equal to lambda R bigger than 0. Yeah, this equation shows that the number of non-vanishing eigenvalues is the rank of this matrix. Right? This V1 up to Vn is an orthonormal basis. So when you take their images under the action of this matrix, I get the image of the linear transformation induced by this matrix, and the dimension of the image is the rank of the matrix. Okay. But only, so if rank is R, then beyond R I should get 0 vector, because this lambda 1 V1, lambda 2 V2, etc., they are mutually perpendicular. So R of them in the image of these are mutually perpendicular non-zero vectors, and therefore the rank of which is R will give you non-vanishing lambda i's. So R, that's why I'm using this R. Okay. Now, so let sigma I be the square root of lambda I. And other sigma i's are 0. These are non-negative numbers, I can extract their square roots. Right? So I am applying spectral theorem for real symmetric matrices on A transpose A. I get an orthonormal basis, and these lambda i's are eigenvalues, take their square roots, and these are the singular values of the original matrix. Okay, we will see how that goes. So therefore I can multiply this equation by Vi transpose A VI and this is lambda I Vi transpose Vi, and this is unit length, and therefore this is lambda I, and this is equal to the square of length of AVI, because this is the transpose of this vector. This is square of AVI. Okay. Yeah, and this is sigma I square. So this says that length of AVI is sigma I. Yeah, length of AVI is equal to sigma I. That's very good. I mean, A was an arbitrary matrix. A was arbitrary matrix. Yeah, and we know its action on every Vi. Action of A on every Vi. These Vi's are orthonormal basis of eigenvectors of A transpose A. They came from A transpose A. But when you apply A on these coordinate vectors V1, V2, Vn, they set up a coordinate system in your Euclidean space Rn. And when you are applying this matrix, taking the linear transformation induced by A, it is mapping these mutually perpendicular vectors to sigma I times Vi. Okay. So the action of A is understood, okay, along these directions. So our original coordinate system may not be good for understanding action of A, but when you choose this coordinate system, V1, V2, Vn, okay, which is consisting of the eigenvectors of A transpose A, then on this orthonormal basis of Rn, I understand the action of A very nicely, that AVI is simply sigma I. I mean, the length of AVI is sigma I. So A is acting on these mutually perpendicular direction and taking these Vi's, the unit vectors, to sigma I Vi. So action of A is simply stretching in these directions. Okay, the whole point is we have found a nice coordinate system on which the action of A has been simplified. Okay. Yeah. So singular values, ith singular value is simply the length of AVI. Okay, where Vi's are orthonormal basis of consisting of eigenvectors of A transpose A. Okay, there is one interpretation. There are other interpretation of singular values. So A is acting from Rn to Rn, and I have this basis V1 up to Vn. This is orthonormal basis of eigenvectors of A transpose A, and A is sending them to AV1, AV2, and the non-zero vectors will be only up to AVR, right? The eigenvalues beyond R are all 0. Okay, so these are the non-zero vectors among all AVI, and this is equal to sigma 1 V1, this is sigma 2 V2, and this is sigma R VR. Fine? Yeah. What is the column space of A? Column space of A is the image of the linear transformation induced by A. Column space consists of linear combination of column vectors. Okay, that is the column space. But any linear combination of column vectors can be realized as A times a vector U. Right? So if you operate A on basis and collect the images of basis vectors and take the space spanned by them, I will get the column space. So column space is spanned by AV1, AV2, AVR. Yeah, we discussed the 4 fundamental spaces last time of associated with the matrix, and the singular value decomposition, it gives you a the column space tells you that the column space is spanned by these vectors. All right. Okay. So these are non-zero vectors because sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma r, they are non-zero eigenvalues. They are non-negative. Okay. So now set ui equal to avi. Its length is the ith singular value. Okay, length of avi by this calculation, yeah, the length of avi is ith singular value. So I can divide by its length. Then what is this? This is a unit vector. Fine. I have divided by the length of avi, which is the ith singular value. This is a unit vector. Yeah, what do you expect? These are mutually perpendicular. Yeah, what do you expect from these vectors? These are all non-zero vectors. If you divide by their lengths, sigma 1, sigma 2, sigma r, okay, very interesting thing happens. They are also mutually perpendicular. Although A is not the orthogonal matrix, A is arbitrary matrix. But if you are operating on sigma 1, V1, V2, Vn, which are orthonormal basis of eigenvectors of A transpose A, then suddenly I get these vectors, they are mutually perpendicular. Let us verify this. Okay, claim AV1, AV2, AVR are mutually perpendicular vectors. So proof. Yeah. So to show they are mutually perpendicular, I should take dot product and show that it is 0. Yeah. So take two different AVI and take their dot product. That is same as AVJ transpose times AVI, and this is equal to VJ transpose, yeah, A transpose A VI. Is that right? Yeah. Yeah. Do you see why they are orthogonal? Yes. This is eigenvector of A transpose A. So this is lambda I Vi. So this is equal to Vj transpose lambda I Vi. So I take lambda I out and Vj transpose Vi, but Vj and Vi, if I is not equal to j, they are perpendicular, and therefore this is 0 if I is not equal to j. So take I not equal to j, this is true. Yeah, this is unexpected. This is really unexpected that I am taking this arbitrary matrix A, I am applying this on orthonormal basis of eigenvectors of A transpose A, then the images are mutually perpendicular. Whenever you have two non-zero images of A acting on this orthonormal basis of eigenvectors, I get mutually perpendicular vectors. So therefore this UIs, I just divided by singular value. So these UIs are mutually perpendicular unit vectors. Okay? But where do they live? These vectors, where do they live? Yeah, they live inside this space. Okay? So in Rn, I have a nice coordinate system which is coming from eigenvectors of A transpose A, but I apply the matrix A, then I get R mutually perpendicular vectors. I divide by their length, I get R mutually perpendicular unit vectors. I call them as U1, U2, UR, okay, after you divide. Okay. Now, so now keep in mind the four fundamental subspaces of the matrix. So on this side I have the row space of A. Row space of A. And what is its perpendicular space? null space. Yeah, and on this side I have column space of A, and what is the perpendicular space? Null space of A transpose. This is really the row space of A transpose. So here I have row space of A and null space of A. Here I have row space of A transpose and null space of A transpose. These two are perpendicular, these two are perpendicular. Their sum is this entire space and their sum is this entire space. These are the four spaces. Okay. So what we are getting is, I am applying A from Rn to Rm. This is my linear transformation. Okay. And I have this basis V1, V2, Vn. This is a basis and this is being mapped to AV1, AVR, and then I convert this into unit vectors U1 up to UR. Okay. If I divide by their length and then take the subspace spanned by U1 up to UR, yeah, I will get the column space. Yeah, because every vector in the image of A is linear combination of AV1, AVR, because V1 up to Vn was the basis. Okay, so column space of A is really the linear span of U1, U2, UR. Is that clear? Yeah, how did we find the column space? Using eigenvectors of A transpose A. Yeah, you take eigenvectors of A transpose A, apply your matrix and get these R non-vanishing vectors and convert them into unit vectors. I get a orthonormal basis of column space. U1 up to UR is a orthonormal basis of column space. Yeah, and this is perpendicular space to this. I find a orthonormal basis of this space, and that can be done by extending U1, U2, UR to an orthonormal basis of the entire space by Gram-Schmidt process. You can extend any set of mutually perpendicular vectors to a full set of mutually perpendicular basis vectors by Gram-Schmidt process. Okay, so extend this U1 up to UR, which is basis of the column space, to a basis of the entire space, but it should be an orthonormal basis. Yeah, so extend. This is so let U be the matrix where the column vectors are U1, U2, and UR, and then extend it further UM. So this is the basis of column space, and then I extend it and make a orthonormal basis of the entire space Rm, and I get this matrix U. That is the matrix U which goes into singular value decomposition. U was supposed to be an M by M matrix, and this is that M by M matrix of mutually perpendicular unit vectors, and therefore this is an orthogonal matrix. Yeah, this is an orthogonal matrix. Okay, what do we need to prove? I have my V, I have defined V. V was consisting of column vectors, and these column vectors form a orthonormal basis of eigenvectors of A transpose A, and I have mapped these vectors by action of A, and then I got R linearly independent vectors, normalize them to make it unit vectors, and then extend it and make a orthonormal basis of entire Rm space, the image. Okay, Rm is the codomain. Okay, and then I got this matrix A. We have to now just prove that A U sigma A equal to U sigma V transpose, and that will establish the existence of SVD. So yesterday, when you were doing experiment on Scilab, yeah, you were not getting A back, right? You constructed U, constructed sigma, constructed V, yeah. But why should they multiply to A? They multiply to A only if you construct this way. The V matrix is the eigenvectors of A transpose A. So that is arbitrary. You can take any basis of orthonormal basis of eigenvectors of A transpose A. You begin by that. That is your matrix V. but U is dependent on V when you do the computation. Yeah. So to get V, this is the algorithm. Take AV, AU1, AU2, AVM, normalize them, make them unit vectors, and then ask for extension of this mutually perpendicular unit vectors to form a orthonormal basis. Right? So that should be your U, and then A will be equal to U sigma V transpose, not otherwise. It may happen sometime by chance, but you don't expect that all the time. So that was the mistake which was happening yesterday in the computation. Okay, so redo that by using this algorithm. How to get U? That is from the proof. Yeah, it was not giving orthonormal basis for the column vectors of U. Yeah, they have to multiply properly, right? U sigma V transpose must be equal to A, and therefore V is definitely related to U is related to V, and that is this process. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So you have, but yeah, so they don't multiply to A. Yeah, they will multiply to A only if U is constructed this way. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So to prove that this is the singular value decomposition, I just need to multiply and check that this is correct. So claim U constructed this way, U1, U2, UM. So what are these things? So you take UI, UM. So UI was AVI over sigma I. Okay, if sigma I is non-zero. So U is constructed this way, and V consists of V1, Vn, and these are this is orthonormal basis of eigenvectors of A transpose A, and sigma equal to sigma 1, sigma 2, like this. This is M by N matrix, and we want to show that then A equal to U sigma V transpose. We want to show that this is the factorization, and that is same as proving that AV equal to U sigma, because V transpose is inverse of V. V is orthogonal matrix, so inverse of orthogonal matrix is simply transpose, and so I can bring V on this side, and to prove this is correct, I need to just check AV equal to U sigma. Yeah, so let us do that AV is equal to U sigma. Claim AV equal to U sigma. How to get column vectors on the left hand side? Column vectors on the left hand side are AV1, AV2, AVN. Yeah, and AVI equal to sigma I UI. Others are 0. Okay, so left hand side is AV1, AV2, AVN. These are the column vectors of matrix on the left hand side. But we know that AVI equal to sigma I UI. Yeah, by construction, this is true for I equal to 1 to up to R, and otherwise AVI is 0. What is the right hand side? What is this matrix? Sigma 1 U1, sigma 2 U2, etc. And that's precisely this. Okay, the way we have constructed U, this factorization is easy to see. Any doubt? Yeah, so existence of singular value decomposition is obtained in a particular fashion. We are not multiplying arbitrary matrix U, which is consisting of eigenvectors of A transpose A, and another matrix V, which is consisting of, V consists of eigenvectors of A transpose A, and U consisting of eigenvectors of A transpose. But it will happen that this is really this is an orthogonal matrix. The way we have constructed U, it is an orthogonal matrix, and it will consist of eigenvectors, mutually perpendicular unit vectors, which are eigenvectors of A transpose. Okay, that you can check that these are eigenvectors of A transpose, and column vectors of V will be eigenvectors of A transpose A. You can just multiply and check. Okay, let us do that for your satisfaction. So if A has this form, then calculate A transpose A. A transpose A will be V transpose sigma U transpose times U sigma V transpose. So this is equal to U transpose sigma transpose V U sigma V transpose. U transpose sigma transpose U transpose, U transpose V transpose. Okay. This is U. This is U. And this is V transpose. Yeah. So this is V and U transpose. Now this is identity. So V sigma transpose sigma V, and that is equal to V sigma transpose. This is M by N matrix, and this is N by M matrix. So this product is N by N, and the entries will be sigma 1 square, sigma 2 square, 0, and this is V transpose. Okay. So A transpose A equal to this, and therefore A transpose A, this is V inverse, so I can take V here, and that is equal to V times sigma 1 square, sigma 2 square, etc. So that says that the column vectors of V are eigenvectors of A transpose A, yeah, with eigenvalues sigma 1 square, sigma 2 square, sigma r square, 0, 0, 0. If you have this factorization, it is forced on us that the column vectors of V are eigenvectors of A transpose A. And you can do a similar calculation, right? Calculate A transpose times A, and you will see that column vectors of U will be eigenvectors of A transpose. Okay? But if you take arbitrary set of column vector orthonormal basis of eigenvectors of A transpose, and you take the matrix V, which is consisting of orthonormal basis of eigenvectors of A transpose A, and multiply, you are not going to get back A, because this factorization forces a relation between U and V. Okay, and the proof shows how to get U once you have V. Okay, yeah. So you need to do two processes of Gram-Schmidt orthonormalization. One, while getting a basis of eigenvectors of A transpose A, and then we get U1 up to UR. There are images of these are AV1, AV2, AVR, and then we extend it to an orthonormal basis of the codomain space Rm, and then I have proper factorization. So while computing, you keep that in mind, that V can be arbitrary, but U is dependent on V, and the proof shows how to construct U. Okay, so now this is the existence, and now let me show the important application of SVD for approximation, least square approximations. Yes, even then you can obtain. Yeah, yeah, yeah. SVD is not unique because the first step itself has infinitely many choices. Eigenvectors, orthonormal basis of eigenvectors is not unique. Yeah, it depends on which is the first vector that you begin with. The second vector can be made orthogonal by changing it by projecting and subtracting. Yeah, so there are really infinite set of orthonormal basis of eigenvectors. But once you have fixed one set, the other set is dependent on it. Yeah. Yes.
Now U depends on the
V.
So is it true that Newton times V also depends
Yes.
on U?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Then you have to see that A transpose, rather than looking at action of A from Rn to Rm, you look at action of A transpose from Rm to Rn. So you choose your basis U and then map it by acting A transpose on that, and then collect non-zero vectors, orthonormalize, same process will work. Okay, so let's now look at least square approximation. So this problem arises when you have some data and we want to see whether there is some rule which is governing some data. Okay, we plot some data and we very often we find that there is a straight line. Okay, this data is scattered around very closely around a straight line. Sometimes the data is scattered very closely around a quadratic like a parabola or something like that. And in old times, that's how people discovered physical laws. Like inverse square law can be deduced by looking at the orbits of planets. That the orbits of planets were elliptic and they were given by quadratic equation, and Newton reworked the gravitational square law, came from this. He reversed the process. Okay, what should be the gravitational force law so that the orbits of planets will be given by elliptic equations. Yeah. So the problem of fitting data with well-known curves is very important in applications. Okay, least square fit, what it does, it will fit a line or a quadratic equation or a cubic equation, depends on how this data is distributed. We try to fit something, some curve, okay, for this data. So we start with a straight line, but then the straight line should be very close to these observed points. That means if I have the equation of the straight line and plug in xi coordinate, yeah, then the yi coordinate that I get from the straight line differs from the actual yi by very small number. Okay, so these differences in the y coordinates, we square them and take this, add them and take the square root, and we want to minimize the sum of squares of the errors. Yeah, so if there was a straight line which fit the data, then the straight line predicts for each x coordinate, which is observation, it predicts the y coordinate, but we know the y coordinate also from observation. So observed value of y as against the predicted value of y from the straight line, they differ very little, and that difference we want to minimize. And it turns out that there is a unique straight line if you want to minimize these errors, and there is a unique quadratic equation if you want to minimize the errors. Yeah, so that is the power of least square approximation, that the curve that you are fitting is uniquely determined. Yeah, so you try to fit that curve and see whether it is fitting your data, and so you can observe physical laws by curve fitting, because you make some observations and try to find what is the law governing those data. Yeah, so yesterday in the class, in the lab, we saw how to fit a straight line, but we can do the same procedure and try to fit a quadratic or a cubic, etc., etc. Okay, if the straight line doesn't fit, like we had in the second exercise, we had some 4 or 5 points and straight line was not fitting there. Yeah, there was a nice parabola which was fitting. So by observation, you find that, okay, straight line is not fitting this data. So you try to find a quadratic which fits the data, but the procedure is the same. Okay, so we want to understand what is the theory behind that. Okay, so the basic principle behind least square approximation is the following: that I have my entire space Rn and I have a subspace. Okay, I have a subspace and I have a vector W. Okay, so this could consist of, say, functions, sin x, cosine x, exponential, etc. And this could consist of the subspace of polynomials of degree n. Take polynomials of degree n, real polynomials of degree n, they form a subspace of the space of all continuous functions, and their dimension is n plus 1. Yeah. So given a continuous function, suppose you want to approximate by a polynomial of degree n. Okay, what do? We think of the space of polynomials of degree n as this subspace, and this is the function. Okay, then what do? The geometrically, what do? We project it and find this vector in U. So project that vector inside U. Okay, let us see that the projection is the best approximation to W if you remain inside U. What is the meaning of best approximation? Well, take the difference of projected vector and the original vector W. Now take the difference of vector W with any vector U in the subspace U. Okay, then we will prove that the projected vector is the closest to W. That means the norm of the difference of W with any vector U in the subspace is bigger or equal to norm of the difference of W with the projected vector of W. Yeah. So this is the projected vector of W in the subspace W. Okay. Then we will see that norm of W minus the projected vector is less equal to W minus U norm for all vectors U in U. So in this sense, the projected vector is the closest to W if you remain inside the subspace. So this subspace could be space of linear functions, or it could be space of quadratic polynomials, or it could be space consisting of sin x, cosine x, sin 2x, cosine 2x, etc., etc. Then what you get is a truncated Fourier series. Yeah, so Fourier series is an example of this. All right. So yeah, so how do we find this projected vector? Okay, how do we find this projected vector? So take a orthonormal basis. Suppose this is an orthonormal basis of U. Okay, in practice we are concerned with finite dimensional subspaces. Yeah, take a orthonormal basis of U and take this vector W and look at its projection along the directions, along all these directions. Okay, I have these n mutually perpendicular directions. So I take the projection of this W on each direction. Yeah. So this is the projection. This is the projected vector in the direction of the line which is spanned by U1. Yeah. This is the dot product of W with U1 multiplied by U1 to indicate the direction, and this is the projection of W in the direction spanned by UN. And add all these projections. This is inside the space U because this is linear combination of U1, U2, UN. Okay, this is my projected, this is called the projection of W on U. Is that clear? Yeah, I have a big space and I have all kinds of vectors in it, they could be functions, and big space could be infinite dimensional. And inside this big space, I have a finite dimensional subspace. And I am trying to understand what is the vector in the smaller subspace which comes closest to this vector W. Okay. So geometrically, it is the projection of W inside this U. To find the projection of W, you project W in each one of these n directions and add these projections. Okay. That is the projection of W inside this subspace, and let us see that it is the best approximation to W inside U. And that means that if I take the difference of W with U for arbitrary U, this error is bounded, it's the upper bound on this error. So the error of W with the projected vector is the smallest possible among these. And we will see that if you want to minimize this error, U has to be the projection. Okay, and that's the reason why a straight line which fits the data is uniquely determined. If a quadratic equation fits the data, it is uniquely determined. Okay, that is the reason. Okay, so let us understand this. Why the projected vector comes closest. Because of lack of time, I will leave that. This follows from Pythagoras theorem. The reason is that if I take difference of W and the projected vector, it is perpendicular to U. That is the reason. Okay, you apply Pythagoras theorem to get that inequality. Okay, because of lack of time, I'll skip that and come to the application. So least square application. You have a system of linear equations. Okay, we got this system of linear equations while trying to fit a straight line, right? That straight line was, what was that system? It was 1, put all the x coordinates, and then straight line has 2 parameters. Yeah, we are trying to fit a straight line, y equal to s plus tx. T is the slope and s is the intercept, and this is equal to the y coordinates. Yeah. So the problem of fitting a straight line reduces to a system of linear equations with 2 unknowns. Suppose you want to fit a quadratic, then there will be 3 parameters here, because we want to fit s plus tx plus a ux square. Yeah, a quadratic, if you want to fit a quadratic polynomial, then this will be stu, okay, right? So the problem of fitting a polynomial of degree n is translated into a system of linear equations like this, ax equal to b. Yeah, but this is experimental data, and therefore we don't have this exact equation. The actual values of y, if you calculate from the straight line, will be different from the observed values of y. Therefore, this is only an approximation. So we want to find the best approximation. That means B is, if B belongs to column space of A, then there is no problem. We will find an x. Yeah, this gives an x. Gives an x. But B may not belong to the column space of A, because this is the observed data. Yeah, and they are not coming from this straight line fit. They are scattered around this straight line. So when you apply the left hand side, you don't get the right hand side. You get approximate values of yi's. Okay. So B is not in the column space of Ax. So we want to find the best approximation to B in the column space. This Ax is in the column space. Yeah, this x1 times first column vector of A plus x2 times second column vector of A. So left hand side is in the column space, and I want to find among the vectors in the column space the best vector to B. But that principle says, in order to find the best vector in the column space which is approximating B, what should I do? Project the vector B in the column space, and that is the best approximation. Yeah. So by that algorithm, I must find a orthonormal basis of the column space and then take the projection of B along all these n mutually perpendicular direction, add up the projections, and that is the best approximation to B in the column space. Yeah, this is a lot of computation. We have to find the orthonormal basis of the column space. So let us see that SVD bypasses all these things. Yeah. So you calculate SVD of the coefficient matrix. In this case, this is the coefficient matrix. We'll calculate the SVD of this coefficient matrix, and that will give us the best approximation to B in the column space of A. Yeah. So let us see why that is coming. Yeah. So if AX is the best approximation to B in the column space of A, then you look at AX minus B. Yeah. So this is the column space of A, and I have found the best approximation to B. This is the projection of B in this column space of A. Okay. Then when I subtract the projection, it is going to be perpendicular to the best approximation. Yeah. So that equation translates into this. AX minus B is the leftover part. AX is the approximation and AX minus B is the error. Okay. AX minus B is the error, and length of this vector is consisting of the sum of squares, the square root of sum of squares of the errors. Okay. And because of this principle, by using Pythagoras theorem, AX minus B, if AX is the best approximation, AX minus B is perpendicular to the column space. That means it is perpendicular to every row vector of A transpose. The row vectors of A transpose are column vectors of A. Okay. And this equation says AX minus B is perpendicular to every row vector of A transpose. That means AX minus B is perpendicular to every column vector of A, and therefore AX minus B is perpendicular to column space of A. So this equation is statement of this fact that AX minus B is perpendicular to column space of A. Yeah. For best approximation, this has to be satisfied, and this means A transpose AX is equal to A transpose B. These are very famous equations. These are called normal equations. Normal equations. For the best approximation, if AX is the best approximation, then A transpose AX is A transpose B. Yeah. Now substitute SVD of A into this equation and see what the magic happens. Yeah. So A transpose AX equal to A transpose B, and let A be equal to U sigma V transpose B and SVD of A. Okay. So substitute into this. So you will get V sigma transpose U transpose A U sigma V transpose X equal to A transpose. So V sigma transpose U transpose B. Okay. And this then okay, maybe I did too much simplification. Yeah. So substitute the SVD of A into this equation because we want to understand the error. So this is equal to U sigma V transpose times X minus B, but I can write B as UU transpose B because this is identity matrix. And now factor U from this equation, and I get sigma V transpose X minus U transpose B. Okay. So this is the this vector indicates the error. Yeah. So we want to minimize the length of this vector for the best approximation. Okay. So length of this vector has to be minimized. So I need to minimize length of this vector. But U is an orthogonal matrix. Okay. The length of Ux is same as length of X. So this says that Ax minus B length is same as length of sigma V transpose X, let us write this as Y, and U transpose B, let us write as C. So I have access to SVD and I translate this vector B, transform this vector by the action of U inverse, and transform this indeterminate by V. So if I can find a Y, I can find X also, because Y and X are related by an invertible matrix. Okay, so this is equal to sigma Y minus C. Yeah, V is a n by n matrix. Okay, and B is a vector in Rm. B is a vector in Rm, and this is a m by m matrix. Okay, so I have this. Yeah, but sigma is now U and V have disappeared. Sigma is a diagonal matrix. Sigma is a diagonal matrix. So I can easily write sigma Y minus C. What is sigma Y? What are the components of sigma Y minus C? The components are sigma 1 Y1 minus C1, sigma 2 Y2 minus C2, and last non-zero singular value is sigma R, YR minus CR, and then the next one will be minus CR plus 1, minus CR plus 2, minus CM. So I have this vector. Okay, I have this vector Cm. These are coming from U transpose B. B is given to us. B are the observed quantities, and U is coming from the SVD. So this we have no control over this. This is as it is. So these are determined. Minus CR plus 1, minus CR2 plus 2, minus Cm. They are determined. So how can we minimize length of this vector? Yeah, if these components are 0, yeah, we can make these components into 0. So therefore, what is Y1? Y1 is equal to C1 over sigma 1. Remember, sigma 1 is not 0. Y2 equal to C2 over sigma 2, etc. Okay, this Y was V transpose X. We are trying to find an X, so that Ax is the best approximation to B. Okay, I have found Y. And therefore I can find X, and then multiply by A. You will find the best approximation. Okay, so my time is over, but this can be formalized in the language of pseudo inverse or generalized inverse, and so using the SVD, I can find a pseudo inverse of A. Okay, we wrote the formula for pseudo inverse yesterday in the lab session. So apply the pseudo inverse of A obtained from the SVD and operate it on B. That is the best approximation. Okay. Yeah, there are many more applications of SVD. You just Google, you will find plenty of information. There are books on SVD now, because it has, wherever there is a data, there is a rectangular matrix, and you want to make sense out of this data. And fortunately, the singular values and singular vectors they extract the information in the most economical way from this large amount of data. Okay. So you will see applications to process control in the next 2 lectures, which Professor Sachin Patwardhan is going to give. How SVD comes in chemical engineering and control theory. Okay, so I'll stop here and thank you for your attention.